At my sister's wedding, her MIL pointed and proclaimed, "You can stand by the trash. We're out of seats." I surveyed the room and found even her cat got a spot. So I grabbed my gift, smiled, and declared, "Fitting, since that's where this marriage belongs." She came rushing as I proceeded. I, 32M, never thought I'd be the one to cause a scene at my sister's wedding, but some insults cut too deep to ignore. The morning started perfectly. My sister had been planning this day for 2 years, and despite our complicated family history, I was genuinely happy for her. She'd found someone who seemed to treat her well, though I had my reservations about his family from the few interactions we'd had during the engagement period. I arrived at the venue early, wearing my best suit and carrying an expensive crystal vase I'd saved months to buy. The wedding was being held at an upscale country club, the kind of place where everything gleamed and the staff moved like shadows. My sister had always dreamed of a fancy wedding, and her fiancé's family had the means to make it happen. The ceremony itself was beautiful. I watched my sister walk down the aisle, radiant in her dress, and felt that familiar protective surge I'd experienced since we were kids. Our parents died when she was 16 and I was 24, leaving me to help raise her through her final years of high school. We'd been through everything together. After the ceremony, guests began filtering into the reception hall. I followed the crowd, still holding my gift, looking for the appropriate table to place it and find my assigned seat. The hall was decorated with white roses and gold accents, crystal chandeliers casting warm light over round tables draped in ivory linens. That's when I encountered her. My sister's new mother-in-law approached me near the entrance to the reception area. She was a woman in her late 50s, impeccably dressed in a navy blue dress that probably cost more than my monthly salary. Her hair was perfectly styled, her jewelry tasteful but expensive, and her expression carried that particular brand of disdain I'd seen before from people who believe their bank account determined their worth as human beings. She looked me up and down with barely concealed disgust, her eyes lingering on my off-the-rack suit and department store shoes. I'd done my best with what I had, but apparently it wasn't enough for her standards. Without any pleasantries or acknowledgement that I was the bride's brother, she pointed toward a corner near the kitchen doors where the catering staff had set up a waste station. The area was clearly not meant for guests, with its utilitarian setup and proximity to the service entrance. She informed me that I could stand by the trash because they were out of seats. Her tone was casual, almost bored, as if she were directing a server to clean up a spill rather than speaking to a family member of the bride. I stood there for a moment, processing what she'd just said. Behind her, I could see the reception hall filling with guests, all of whom seemed to be finding their assigned places at beautifully set tables. The wedding had about 150 attendees, and I couldn't believe that in a venue this size, with this much planning, they'd somehow forgotten to account for the bride's only living family member. Curiosity got the better of me, and I decided to take a walk around the room to see just how dire this seating shortage really was. What I discovered made my blood boil. At table after table, I saw place settings for people who hadn't even bothered to show up. Empty chairs with name cards for distant relatives and family friends who'd apparently sent regrets after the final head count. But what really pushed me over the edge was what I saw at the head table. There, next to the bride and groom, was a small cushioned chair with a tiny place setting. A miniature bow tie had been attached to the chair back, and a small nameplate read the name of my sister's new in-law's Persian cat. The cat wasn't even present at the reception, but it had been allocated a seat at the most prestigious table in the room. I walked back to where the mother-in-law was holding court with several other guests, regaling them with stories about the wedding planning process and how everything had to be absolutely perfect for her son's special day. She was emphasizing how much money they'd spent, how exclusive the venue was, and how carefully they'd curated the guest list to include only the most important people in their lives. The irony wasn't lost on me. Here was a woman who'd given a chair to a cat that wasn't even in attendance, while directing the bride's only brother to stand next to the garbage. I approached her again, and this time my voice carried a different tone. I thanked her for clarifying the seating situation and mentioned that I'd taken a look around the room to better understand the space constraints she'd mentioned. I noted that I'd seen quite a few empty seats, including what appeared to be a special place setting for their family pet. Her response was everything I expected. She became defensive, explaining that those seats were reserved for very important people who might still arrive, and that the cat's play setting was a charming family tradition that I obviously wouldn't understand. She suggested that perhaps I wasn't familiar with how elegant weddings were conducted, given my background. That last comment was the breaking point. I looked down at the expensive gift in my hands, then back at her smug expression. The crystal vase had taken me 3 months to save for, representing hours of overtime and skipped dinners out. I'd chosen it because my sister had always loved beautiful things, and I wanted to give her something that would remind her of this day for years to come. But looking around at this circus of artificial importance and manufactured exclusivity, I realized that my gift would likely end up forgotten in a closet, overshadowed by the mountain of expensive presents from her new family's wealthy circle. I raised my voice just enough to catch the attention of nearby guests and told her that she was absolutely right about the seating arrangement. Standing by the trash was indeed fitting, since that appeared to be exactly where this marriage belonged. The words hung in the air like smoke after a gunshot. Conversations around us stopped mid-sentence. Guests turned to stare, unsure whether they'd heard correctly. The mother-in-law's face went through several color changes, from white to red to purple, like a traffic light stuck in malfunction mode. I wasn't finished. I continued by observing that any family that would treat their new daughter-in-law's only brother with such disrespect on her wedding day was showing their true character. I noted that it was interesting how they'd found room for an absent cat at the head table, but couldn't manage to squeeze in the person who'd helped raise the bride after their parents died. The mother-in-law began sputtering, trying to interrupt me, but I'd found my rhythm and wasn't stopping. I mentioned that my sister deserved better than to be married into a family that measured people's worth by their bank statements and treated kindness as a luxury they couldn't afford. I suggested that if this was how they handled family relationships, I could only imagine what kind of support system they'd provide during the inevitable challenges that every marriage faces. By this point, a significant portion of the reception had turned to watch our exchange. I could see my sister across the room, still in her wedding dress, looking confused and concerned as she noticed the commotion. Her new husband was beside her, his expression unreadable. The mother-in-law finally found her voice and began demanding that I leave immediately. She called for security, though the venue didn't actually have any on site. She threatened to have me arrested, though I hadn't touched anyone or damaged any property. Her voice grew shriller with each threat, drawing even more attention to our corner of the room. I remained calm throughout her tirade, which seemed to infuriate her even more. When she finally paused for breath, I told her that she was absolutely right again. This wasn't the place for someone like me, someone who actually cared about my sister as a person rather than as an accessory to enhance their social status. I walked over to the gift table and placed my crystal vase among the other presents. As I set it down, I announced to anyone within earshot that it was from the bride's brother, the one who wasn't important enough for a seat, but apparently significant enough to inspire a public meltdown from the groom's mother. The walk toward the exit felt like it took forever, with every step carrying me past staring faces and whispered conversations. Some guests looked sympathetic, others appeared scandalized, and a few seemed genuinely entertained by the drama they'd just witnessed. Just as I reached the main door, I heard my sister calling my name. She was hurrying across the room as quickly as her dress would allow, her face flushed and her eyes wide with a mixture of embarrassment and something that looked like understanding. She caught up to me just outside the reception hall and asked what had happened. I could see the internal conflict playing out across her features. This was supposed to be the happiest day of her life, but her new mother-in-law had just publicly humiliated her only family member. I explained the situation calmly, from the initial directive to stand by the trash to my discovery of the cat's reserved seat. I told her that I understood this was her wedding day and I didn't want to cause her pain, but I couldn't pretend that being treated like garbage was acceptable. My sister's expression shifted from confusion to anger as the full picture became clear. She asked me to wait while she went back inside to address the situation. I told her not to worry about it, that I'd already said what needed to be said, and that I just wanted her to be happy. But she was determined to set things right. She marched back into the reception hall with a purposefulness I recognized from our childhood. The same energy she'd displayed when defending me from neighborhood bullies or standing up to teachers who treated her unfairly. I waited outside for about 10 minutes before she returned, this time accompanied by her new husband. His face was tight with stress, and I could tell that whatever conversation had just taken place inside hadn't gone smoothly. My sister informed me that she'd made it very clear to her mother-in-law that I was family, and family didn't get treated like hired help at weddings. She'd also mentioned that if there wasn't room for her brother at the reception, then perhaps there wasn't room for her either. Her husband looked uncomfortable, but nodded in agreement. He apologized for his mother's behavior and explained that she sometimes got carried away with social protocols and forgot about basic human decency. He assured me that it wouldn't happen again and asked if I'd consider coming back inside. I appreciated the gesture, but the damage was done. I told them that I'd already made my statement and that continuing the evening would only create more tension for everyone involved. I suggested they return to their guests and try to salvage what was left of their celebration. My sister hugged me tightly and whispered that she was proud of me for standing up for myself. She said she'd always known her new in-laws were pretentious, but she hadn't realized how cruel they could be to people they considered beneath them. As I drove home, I reflected on the evening's events. I'd probably burned several bridges and created lasting family drama that would follow my sister for years. But I'd also drawn a line in the sand about how I was willing to be treated, and sometimes that's more important than keeping the peace. Update 1. 3 days after the wedding, my sister called me. She sounded exhausted, like someone who'd been fighting battles on multiple fronts and was running out of energy for the war. She told me that the fallout from the reception had been significant. Several guests had approached her throughout the remainder of the evening, some expressing support for my position and others criticizing what they saw as inappropriate behavior at a wedding. The mother-in-law had spent the rest of the night playing the victim, telling anyone who would listen about how I'd attacked her unprovoked and ruined her son's perfect day. More concerning was the impact on my sister's new marriage. Her husband was caught between defending his wife's family and managing his mother's wounded pride. The mother-in-law was demanding an apology from me and threatening to cut contact with the couple if she didn't get one. My sister asked if I'd consider writing a letter of apology, not because she thought I was wrong, but because she was trying to preserve her relationship with her new in-laws. She explained that married life was already complicated enough without having to navigate a family feud every holiday and special occasion. I understood her position, but I couldn't bring myself to apologize for refusing to accept disrespectful treatment. I told her I'd think about it, but that any apology would have to acknowledge that the original offense came from being directed to stand by the trash while a cat got a seat at the head table. Update 2. A week later, I received an unexpected phone call from my sister's father-in-law. He'd been mostly quiet during the wedding reception drama, and I wasn't sure what to expect from our conversation. He surprised me by apologizing for his wife's behavior. He explained that she'd grown up in extreme poverty and had developed an obsession with social status as an adult, often taking things too far in her efforts to maintain what she perceived as proper hierarchy. He didn't excuse her actions, but he wanted me to understand that her cruelty came from insecurity rather than genuine malice. He also revealed something that put the entire situation in new perspective. Apparently, his wife had specifically instructed the wedding planner to minimize my presence at the reception because she was worried that my working-class background would reflect poorly on their family in front of their wealthy friends. The seating situation wasn't an oversight, it was deliberate. This information made me even more certain that I'd made the right choice in calling out her behavior. What I'd initially assumed was thoughtless rudeness was actually calculated humiliation designed to put me in my place. The father-in-law asked if there was anything he could do to repair the relationship between our families. I told him that I appreciated his call and his honesty, but that the path forward needed to involve his wife acknowledging what she'd done wrong and changing her behavior, not just smoothing things over with explanations about her background. Update 3. 2 months after the wedding, my sister visited me at my apartment. She looked different, more mature somehow, but also sadder than I'd seen her since our parents died. She told me that married life had been challenging in ways she hadn't expected. The mother-in-law continued to make passive-aggressive comments about me in my absence from family gatherings. More troubling was her husband's response to the ongoing tension. Instead of setting boundaries with his mother, he'd begun suggesting that maybe it would be easier if my sister just accepted that our families didn't mesh well and focused on building relationships within his social circle. My sister was beginning to realize that the wedding reception incident had been a preview of larger issues within her new family. They valued conformity and social status over authenticity, and genuine relationships. She was expected to gradually distance herself from her past, including me, in order to fully integrate into their world. She apologized for asking me to consider writing an apology letter. She now understood that the problem wasn't my response to being disrespected, it was the disrespect itself and the family dynamic that made such treatment seem acceptable. I reassured her that she didn't need to apologize for trying to keep peace in her marriage. I told her that I'd always be her brother regardless of how her in-laws felt about me, and that she could call me anytime she needed support or just wanted to remember where she came from. As she was leaving, she turned back and said something that stayed with me. You know what the saddest part is? That crystal vase you brought is the only wedding gift I actually display in our house. Everything else feels like obligation, but yours feels like love. Looking back on that evening at the country club, I don't regret standing up for myself. Sometimes dignity is worth more than diplomatic harmony, and sometimes the trash is exactly where certain attitudes belong. My sister learned something important about her new family that night, even if it took her some time to fully process the implications. The wedding reception lasted a few hours, but the marriages we make, whether to romantic partners or to our principals, last much longer. I chose to stay married to my self-respect, and time proved it was the right choice.